Here's my book, Waterway, which includes a translation of the great spiritual classic, the Daodejing, and also a translation of a much less known or basically unknown text in the West, which I'm calling the Wu Wei Jing, and which is selections from Guosang's ancient commentary on the Shuangzi, another great Taoist classic. Now, I started working on a translation of the Daodejing in the early 90s or around 1990 with graduate students at Vanderbilt, where I was teaching. And I worked on this translation on and off throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, or through the first decade of the 2000s, really. Looking at all the English translations, working with character by character analyses, because I don't read Chinese fluently, working with Chinese students and also Chinese reading professors, and also people working who read other languages. And we looked at some of the translations into German and Spanish, for instance. Now, there are hundreds of translations of the Daodejing, and at a certain point, I kind of stopped trying to be comprehensive about it, or couldn't anymore. Although I've still tried to sample, major new translations and projects that have emerged. All right, now you might wonder why you would possibly want another translation of the Daodejing. One thing I would say is that I have a particular philosophical orientation toward Taoism, or an interpretation of Taoism, and I still don't think I've seen it adequately captured in the going translations. I think the going translations are often marked by the influence of Buddhism. Many of the translators or one another are Zen practitioners of a kind. And that makes sense, because I think, Zen Buddhism, Chan Buddhism in Chinese, is a synthesis of Taoism and Buddhism. That's one initial stab at how it arises. Nevertheless, I think that Taoism is a truly yin-yang philosophy about the interdependence of opposites and the affirmation of both of the pair of each opposite, both sides of each pair. So male and female, power and powerlessness, desire and desirelessness. And I also think that a number of the Western translators, and I feel this myself, look to Eastern philosophy for kind of relief from what we might call means-ends rationality, or technological thinking that infests Western culture and Western philosophy, and that some people, including myself, find to be a torture at times, and also, for example, incredibly environmentally problematic. Now, so at any rate, that's sort of my criticism of some of the translations that I actually love or have taught in the past. One of my favorites is probably the one that's most read in English, Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Daodejing. That's the first one I taught, and I've taught it many, many times, dozens of times over the years. But let me try the first chapter of Mitchell's translation out on you. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. Now again, in my opinion, the Daodejing basically cannot possibly say that you should seek desirelessness. It must affirm both desire and desirelessness. And, to give Mitchell some credit, he does both in that translation. He kind of says both in that translation, or makes Lao Tzu say both in that translation. However, I still think we're getting a Buddhist Taoism in Mitchell, and I don't think that's quite right, I suppose. I'll give you my own translation, or the committees I've worked with translation. I mean, basically, I guess my view on translation is, or at least for this translation project, your loyalty has to be ultimately to the language into which you're construing the text. The goal, I think there's great value in utterly literal translations, for example. Like that could be valuable in a scholarly way. I've used many such translations of the Daodejing. But I think the ultimate goal of literary translation is to give the experience in the language that's being translated into, to readers of the language that you're translating into, that readers of the original language might have had in its original context. Obviously, that's a goal that can never be fully realized. Nevertheless, I feel that is the goal. And what I did was I worked, like I say, through many, character by character literal translations, or many alternative construals, and I produced a literal translation, again with help. But then I tried to construe into a poetic and yet plain, fairly plain, English idiom to try to give readers the sense in English of what this text is like in Chinese, or would have been like in Chinese in its to its ancient audience, to the extent to which that can be known, and to the extent to which that could be done, even if it were known. All right, but anyway, here's my or our translation of chapter 1 of the Daodejing. This book can tell you nothing. The Tao leaves you where you began. A maiden can leave things nameless. A mother must name her children. Perfectly empty or carrying 10,000 words, you still return and return and return. Naming things loses what unites them. Failing to name things loses them into what unites them. Words are limits that make experience possible, but form and formlessness are the same. Tao and the world are the same, though we call them by different names. This unity is dark and deep, but on the other hand, it is deep and dark. It opens into the center of everything. Well, I'm proud of that, and I have to say I'm proud of this translation in many dimensions, if I may be allowed to brag for a moment. I'd love to read many chapters in any translation of the Daodejing, which is such a beautiful text. It's such a cryptic, poetic text. That's why it's, sustains more translations than any text ever has, probably, into various languages. You get the beautiful interdependence of opposites, straightforwardly yet poetically expressed. And for example, in 36, to shrink something, allow it to expand; to weaken something, allow it to become strong; to abolish something, exalt it; to take something, abandon it. This is seeing beneath the surface, live in the world like a fish in the river, rule the world like a knife cutting water. I mean, another aspect of the Daodejing, I think, with regard to which I was dissatisfied with many of the English versions, is that I do think it's a basically anarchist political text, a radical, anti-hierarchical political text. It would have been very radical in its own context. We're talking about ancient Chinese culture, but Chinese culture throughout its history has been marked by, great hierarchy. Not that ours is not. But it's an egalitarian political text and an essentially anti-statist political text, remarkably radical in its original context. And I think that's somewhat obscured in many of the translations into English, and I just wanted to make that plain, in a responsible way to the original text. I mean, I might try a few things on that, like 75, for instance. When taxes are high, officials get fat while the people starve. Then the officials blame the people for being unruly. Really, these people will kill you to enrich themselves. They call that justice or order. It's pretty straight ahead. People who do not fear punishment, this is 72. People who do not fear punishment cannot be controlled. People who fear punishment tempt everyone to oppress them. Therefore, proceed without fear, proceed without fixed purposes. Your purposes can be turned into threats. Be as wide as the sky and just as stormy or calm. Or 66. What is lowest rules, as water always seeks the lowest point. The valley is created and ruled by the water at its bottom. The sage rules people by knowing the depths, by affirming his degradation. He rules by following. Only the one who is lowest has no competitors. All right, well, there are many themes I could run through the Daodejing, and I would love to. I'm going to do, but I'm not going to, right here, right now, on video. I'm going to do another video introducing the Daodejing, which is the second half of Waterway. Guosang's commentary on the Shuangzi. It's beautiful down here behind my house with the little creek, I must say. It's a pleasure to live here. All right.